Excellent. Welcome, everyone, to this, which is the third in our series of Trinity Term conversations with our distinguished visitors here at the Blavatnik School. Joining us this Tuesday is Professor Rebecca Henderson, who will be speaking to us in a moment on her award-winning book, Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire. Professor Henderson is the John and Natty MacArthur University Professor at Harvard. And for those of you who might not be familiar, there are lots of professors at Harvard, but there are only 25 university professors at Harvard. And Rebecca is one of those 25 professors. And a university professor is the highest distinction awarded at Harvard to its faculty, recognizing faculty that have done work that has pan-disciplinary impact. And that is certainly characteristic of the remarkable work that Rebecca has done. Rebecca studied at both MIT and the Harvard Business School, and thereafter was served on the faculty at MIT for many years, where some of her work was on innovation, and in particular, what drives companies, particularly innovative companies, to remain innovative, and how do companies lose their innovative edge. As you can imagine, this is the sort of research that has deep resonance in practice. And so Professor Henderson has spent about 25 years also serving as a member of boards, corporate boards, particularly very innovative companies across the world. About 10 years ago, Professor Henderson joined the faculty of Harvard Business School, and I had the great honor of having her as a mentor and a co-author for many years, and we've done some work together. And so it is a great honor and pleasure to welcome her here to Oxford, her second visit to Oxford in the last few years, as we continue to work together. And Professor Henderson is visiting the Blavatnik School and St. John's College this time around. So I'm going to turn it over to her. She will speak for about 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. And thereafter, if you don't get to ask questions in plenary, there is a cocktail reception immediately thereafter, and you can ask her questions in a small group setting as well. So over to you.
Karthik, thank you. Karthik, thank you very much for that generous introduction. I really appreciate it. And while you were Oxford's gain, you were Harvard's loss. We miss you. It was wonderful to have you as a colleague. Thank you for taking the time to come and listen to me talk about reimagining capitalism in a world on fire. This is an issue, a subject I've been obsessed with for over 15 years now. But I'm going to attempt to cram 15 years of research and a 288-page book into 30 minutes. And to do so, I will start with a story. This is a story about whether investors should care about climate risk. So you may have seen quotes like this floating around in the ethosphere. Climate change is an existential risk. Mike Carney, former governor of the Bank of England. Hiro Mizuno, the chief investment officer of the largest pension fund in the world, the Japanese pension fund. GPIF is not interested in making excess returns. We're more interested in making the whole system more viable. And last but not least, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, the largest asset management firm in the world. We focus on sustainability, not because we're environmentalists, but because we are fiduciary to our client. So a groundswell of action in the financial community saying we really need to do something about climate change because, hey, the world's on fire. Some investors are clearly on board. 73% of investors claim they're using climate to shape their investing. The value of global assets applying ESG has almost doubled over 4 years and tripled over 8. So lots and lots of talk about so-called environmental, social, and governance metrics, about climate, lots of talk out there, lots of celebration. But not everyone is convinced. I want to show you the first few minutes of a talk given by Stuart Kirk at the FT Live Moral Money conference. Stuart was the global head of responsible investments at one of the largest banks in the world. And this is what he said about climate risk.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Andrew, back in the salmon bosom of the FT. It's a real pleasure. I miss the place horrendously. The 10 years at Lex and the FT were the happiest of my professional career, so it's a real joy to be back. You probably don't expect a speech title like this at a conference like this. I do have a beard, which is my one sop to responsible investing. But I can happily say that I'm probably the only head of responsible investing worldwide at a major bank who has never used the word journey, either in print or up on stage. And I take a very, very financial and investment view of the topic. And it's only 20 minutes till coffee. And what I'm going to do over the next course of the 10 slides is to say why I completely disagree with the presentation that Sharon from Deloitte gave a couple of presentations ago, and why climate change is not a financial risk that we need to worry about. Heresy. I completely get that there is a competition for funding. I completely get that at the end of your central bank career, there are still many, many years to fill in. You've got to say something. You've got to fly around the world to conferences. You've got to out hyperbole the next guy. But I feel like it's getting a little bit out of hand. The constant reminder that we are doomed, the constant reminder that within decades it's all over. And indeed, Sharon said, we are not going to survive. And indeed, no one ran from the room. In fact, most of you barely looked up from your mobile phones at the prospect of non-survival. It's become so hyperbolic that no one really knows how to get anyone's attention at all. Now, I wouldn't normally mind that. 25 years in the finance industry, there's always some nut job telling me about the end of the world. I've dealt with gold bugs my whole financial career. The roof's going to cave down. Y2K. Does anyone remember Y2K? Anyone old enough? The lifts didn't stop. But what bothers me about this one is the amount of work these people make me do. The amount of regulation coming down the pipes, the number of people in my team and at HSBC dealing with financial risk from climate change. Last night, Target fell 25%. 25%. And people are asking the board of US companies to spend time dealing with climate risk. I work at a bank that's being attacked by crypto. We've got regulators in the US trying to stop us. We've got the China problem. We've got a housing crisis looming. We've got interest rates going up. We've got inflation coming down the pipes. And I'm being told to spend time and time again looking at something that's going to happen in 20 or 30 years hence. The proportionality is completely out of whack.
So, as you can imagine, this presentation caused somewhat of a furore. Let me show you some of his slides. He said, as climate warnings become ever graver, the more asset prices have increased. So what? Investors are just stupid, or maybe it's not a big deal. Adaptation is cheap and effective. Climate-related costs relative to GDP and mortality rates are down. And he showed us the number of people dying from climate-related and other disasters has fallen dramatically. And he said, who cares if Miami is 6 meters underwater in 100 years? Amsterdam's already underwater, and it's a pretty nice place. Humans are fantastic at adapting to climate change. He showed that for 100 years, the S&P 500 has been returning a good solid 6%. And he said 100 years from now, it will still be returning 6%. And the climactic slide, even if climate risk is not negligible, and let's be clear, he said throughout the presentation, I accept the realities of the science, I understand the science, it's too far in the future to matter for most companies. This whole thing is vastly overblown. What are we worrying about? So my first question is, what's going on? What's happening here? We have a bunch of people running in circles saying climate change is the major risk facing our civilization. We have major financial people trying to implement measures and moves to reduce the risk of climate change. He says it's not a problem, not a problem at all. So what's going on? Why is he saying this? Well, one possibility is that climate change is a non-linear shock in a world in which many people, including perhaps Stuart, think linearly. So it's a well-known psychological problem that people don't understand non-linear shifts in the systems in which they're embedded, and climate change is a non-linear shift. So we're massively shocking the climate, everything may change, but right now it just feels a little bit warmer. Here's an example of a non-linear shift. Overfishing completely fished out the cod. It's not as if anyone saw it coming. Look, right up to when overfishing killed the population, it looked like life was good. In fact, life was very good, and then things collapsed. This is a classic example of a nonlinear system. The fishermen certainly didn't understand that and insisted on fishing right until the end. So maybe that's what's going on. Or maybe he's just not thinking about externalities. His job is to make money for his investors, and he doesn't really care that by 2050, the coral reefs will be gone. They provide protein for about 1 billion people, but that won't affect, probably, the price of his assets. So, why worry? It could be that he's also not much worried about equity. That the fact that Vietnam on the latest latest projections will be almost certainly underwater by 2050 is not really material because it's not a major player in the global supply chain. Or the fact that 34% of the world's population will be exposed to possibly very destructive heat stress is not something he really cares about because they're not the 34% of the population that are buying and really participating in the world's global economy. But perhaps he's right. Perhaps investors shouldn't care about this stuff. Perhaps caring about things like externalities and equities is for government. And if you're using a 7% discount rate, future catastrophes really don't affect your bottom line. So can I assume everyone knows what a discount rate is and has done discounted cash flow analysis?
Probably just a little definition.
One of the most fun moments of my career was explaining this chart, the chart I'm about to show you, to the Dalai Lama. So here's the issue. Bluefin tuna sells for 3 million in a Tokyo market, okay? Bluefin tuna, highly endangered species, not much of it around. This guy runs one of the most ritzy sushi restaurants in Tokyo. He buys it for $3 million. So you think, well, you would care that fish are going, that climate change is poisoning the oceans. This would be an issue if you were a business person. But if you have a 7% discount rate, what does that mean? That means that money now is more valuable than money tomorrow. Anyone in here have a credit card and occasionally charge things? Yes. If you want the money now, you have to pay for it because you can invest it and do good things with it. If I promise you money in 15 years, you say, well, that's very nice, but that's expensive. And one way of thinking about that is most firms run about a 7% discount rate. That is, money now is about 7% more expensive than money tomorrow, and so on and so on. What does that mean for the price of this truly splendid tuna fish? It means that if you leave it in the sea, so it's 3.1 million right now in year 0, if you leave it in the sea by year 50, it's worth Hardly anything at all. Notice it isn't worth very much 20 years from now. It's worth about half what it is in 10 years. So when he says, I really don't care about the future, he's reflecting both an economic reality and a psychological reality. Individuals tend to have discount rates in the 20s. We really value the future much more highly. So maybe he's right. And you can see that the Japanese who were fishing out the tuna certainly believed this. They took everything they could, and now the population is much, much smaller. Take it now, do it now. The future doesn't matter. So one response to this kind of speech is riot. Capitalism isn't working. We want another world. I've been talking about reimagining capitalism for a long time now, and the number of groups I talk to who say, well, why reimagine it? Why not just throw it out the window? Has gone up dramatically. But I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School. And I'm actually a big fan of capitalism. Why? Because it's an amazing source of creativity, innovation, and productivity. It's another whole talk. But in the last few years, the population of the world has increased dramatically. And at the same time, GDP per head has nearly tripled. That's capitalism, that's free markets, that's innovation, that's the efficient allocation of resources. So I'm not a big fan of throwing out capitalism. I want to reimagine it, I want to reform it. And all these good statistics, life expectancy is up, maternal mortality is down. I like capitalism. So how about we get rid of shareholder value maximization instead? One of Karthik's colleagues, Paul Collier, totally wonderful man, may I say, has just published a book called Greed is Good, is Bad, or Greed is Gone. Greed is dead, greed is dead. Greed is dead, greed is dead. Let's get rid of shareholder value maximization. The problem is these business people are thinking only about money. Let's have them think about other things instead. Two classic views of the firm, the shareholder value view, largely attributed to Friedman. Maximizing shareholder value maximizes public welfare. Managers are agents for their investors and have a duty to manage on their behalf. So it's a classic view of the firm, that firms should do what they do and government should do the rest. There's another view out there, which is stakeholder focused, which says, wait. Firms should be managed for their stakeholders. But this view is deeply, deeply embedded in our society, particularly in Anglo-Saxon capitalism, but it's everywhere. Why? Well, people said, well, we should maximize shareholder value, we should maximize profits, because a firm is a nexus of contracts, all this stuff about firms being people and social capital and stuff. People come together. If they don't like it, they can leave. And when markets are perfectly competitive, competitive outcomes are Pareto efficient, and under some circumstances generate maximum prosperity. And agency theory, managers are agents for their investors. They shouldn't go around saying, well, I care about climate change, so I'm going to run your firm to address climate change. I'm an investor. I bought into your firm because I wanted to make money. I don't care about climate change. I have a 7% discount rate. I want you to make money. Plus a deep belief that markets are more compatible with individual freedom than is state control. So lots of deep economic and philosophical basis for the belief that managing firms for the sake of shareholders is in the interests of the entire society and meets your duty to your investors. Pretty compelling case. Here's the issue. And this I want to underline. Managers often think it's a legal requirement, turns out not to be quite true, but a moral duty, an economic necessity, and individually rewarding. So most managers, and this is why I'm glad Karthik told you I have significant public board experience. I've been in the boardroom. You maximize shareholder value. That's what you do. That's what you're there for. But maybe that's a problem. Maybe we should get rid of it. Why? Markets only maximize welfare when externalities are priced. When you burn $10 worth of coal to generate electricity, that'll power your cell phone for about 10 years. Pretty good deal, right? But at the same time, it will cause at least $8 worth of harm to human health. This is according to my colleagues at the School of Public Health, who say that's almost certainly an underestimate. And $8 worth of future climate damage. That's according to my friends, the climate economists. So that $10 worth of coal-fired electricity is causing at least $16 worth of damage to the society. That means all the math is wrong when you start calculating the total welfare in the market. So if externalities are not properly priced, all bets are off. I'm maximizing shareholder value at the coal company, but I'm creating immense social value greater than the social value I'm creating, social positive value I'm creating. They only maximize welfare when everyone can play. If you can't participate in the market because of the color of your skin or the zip code in which you were born, then the whole calculus gets a bit weird. And when firms cannot distort the rules of the game in their own favor. If I can suborn the local legislator, deny climate, fund local politicians to make sure that there's no climate regulation, then the market's not going to be in balance. If I can pay to make sure there's no antitrust policy, or that in one famous case, copyright, I can buy a copyright extension for 20 years for approximately $200,000. Is that what Disney paid? I'm sorry, not paid. That was the support they gave to advance the legislation. Then you don't have a free market. And the basic premises on which the maximization of shareholder value rest are no longer the case. So if these conditions hold, there's no guarantee that maximizing shareholder value will maximize either social or investor welfare. So let's get rid of it. Let's tell firms that they should do something else. Now, here's the issue. It's dangerous to tell firms that they can do something else. To tell a firm that, hey, well, you don't have to maximize shareholder value, but just take care of stakeholders, that should make you a little bit nervous. Because taking care of stakeholders could involve buying a corporate jet and flying your family to a beautiful sun location, because that's really in the best interest of employees, and I'll be a better person if I do that. And you can imagine there's potential for abuse. So if we had a fervent supporter of shareholder value maximization on the stage next to me, they'd say, wait, Rebecca. This is the problem. If we had the right government that was setting the rules and real politics, a strong rule of law and the free press and a vote for labor, we would be in balance. The fact that we don't have a price for carbon and the coal company can burn all that coal and cause all that damage would be corrected by the fact that government should say, whoa, I want a price for carbon. Let's make it expensive to emit all those greenhouse gases. And we would have a press yelling about climate change. And if you're really, really a fan of shareholder value and you really think that climate change is a long time away, you'll say we're actually in that situation. That it's fine for firms to maximize shareholder value because the fact that we don't have climate regulation means that the society doesn't want it. That gets us into a political place, covering some of the issues my husband, Jim Moreau, talked about last week. I do not believe that to be the case. I think our politics are broken in some very profound ways. And in these circumstances, maximizing shareholder value is going to get us into horrible trouble. So here's the obvious solution. And for those of you who are going to leap to your feet and rush out, this is how we fix this problem. All we need to do is broad-based public support for action, rebuild our institutions, enact a price for greenhouse gas emissions, regulate where necessary, and do that globally. Now, this is the School of Government, so I'm assuming you're all absolutely on the case. And I'm joking, but of course, this is what we need. But we're not going to get it next week for technical reasons we could talk about later. So, is it worth trying to persuade firms to become purpose-driven? My agenda for the last 15 years, and that of many of my colleagues and many people inside firms, is to try and build firms that are focused not on maximizing profits at any cost, but on viewing profit maximization as a means to an end. And that end is a healthy and flourishing society. So that's a shift. That's really a shift. Because as I told you, stakeholder firms unconstrained are problematic. You don't want to simply tell a firm, go do whatever you want, but address climate change, because how are they going to make these trade-offs? That's kind of worrisome. So I'm not advocating that we get rid of investor control. This is controversial. Some of my colleagues want to go right to stakeholder maximization. I think that's probably a mistake and unlikely in any place. So when I say purpose-driven firms, I have in mind a middle way, a firm that has a pro-social purpose, that views generating profits as a means to an end, that routinely makes credible commitment to their purpose by sacrificing short-term returns to long-term goals, and that delivers adequate returns over the long term. And as an example, this is a guy called Erik Osmundson, who was a private equity guy in Norway. He became the CEO of a waste company because he thought that helping that waste company embrace recycling and the circular economy could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by millions of tons. So he took over this waste company. As soon as he did so, he discovered the entire industry was corrupt. People were just dumping their waste illegally. He announced he was going to run clean, that he was going to dispose of garbage legally. He was going to invest in recycling. He was going to pay people decently. It was going to be a purpose-driven company. Half of his senior team left. So did half of his customers. He received death threats he had to have from the rest of the industry, who accused him of bringing the industry into disrepute. He had to have police protection for his children. This is a purpose-driven CEO. He stayed, he fought, he built a firm on the basis of recycling. He raised money from purpose-driven investors. His employees were thrilled, those that remained, and really worked. They became very productive, very innovative. He has transformed the waste business in Norway and Scandinavia. He now runs one of the largest recycling companies in Scandinavia. He's not rich, but he makes a good living. And he's helped shift the entire industry towards the circular economy. So that's what I mean when I talk about a purpose-driven guy. So here's the good news. Managers have fiduciary duties. It's almost certainly illegal to announce that you're about to reduce shareholder value to benefit other stakeholders. But if you can make a convincing case that doing the right thing is in the long-term interest of the companies, you are completely on the right side of the law. There are many opportunities to create shared value. My colleague Michael Porter's phrase. If you were business school MBAs, I'd be taking you through all the business cases, all the ways you can tackle problems like climate change and inequality and make a great deal of money. But the poster child, of course, would be the trillion-dollar car company that got created because Mr. Musk thought electric vehicles were the coming thing. Or the largest IPO in the last 10 years on the New York Stock Exchange, which was a plant-based food company. Or the fact that until quite recently, Unilever, which makes a large consumer goods company that makes deodorant and ice cream, was amongst the top 10 most desirable employer in the world. So there's money to be made here. And committing to purpose is an enormous driver of organizational performance. This is my scholarly research for the last 10 years. Every arrow here represents many studies showing the way in which an authentic commitment to purpose, that is, I have police protection for my children, I really mean it, can generate incredible increases in productivity and creativity. We have this very odd result in microeconomics that in every industry, on average, the most productive firm is more than twice as productive as the least. I spent 20 years in windowless conference rooms trying to make this result go away. Economists hated it. We tried better measuring of everything, capital, management skill, employee education, you name it, you name it, you name it. What's driving it? What's driving it is the ability to implement high commitment work practices. Treating your employees with dignity and respect, decentralizing power, that is what is driving the result. What does purpose do? It kickstarts that mechanism. So you can pay for the purpose. Not everything, firms can't take us all the way, but I'm reasonably sure we could reduce emissions by 40% on an NPV positive basis. So maybe purpose-driven firms can be catalyzed, I should have said allies, in changing the system. Why? Because they see more broadly, they demonstrate that there's money to be made, they've made expenses commitments to doing the right thing, making them more trustworthy allies and partners, and they might be potential drivers of cultural and political change. So that's the pitch. 5 steps to systemic change: creating shared value, build cooperation, rewire finance, rebuild our institutions. That's the book, 288 pages. Feel free to pick it up or to watch me give a 20-minute talk summarizing these 5 ideas. But I'm not saying this is a done deal. I'm not even saying it's likely, but it is possible and it is beginning. It is happening now. So, couldn't resist an implications for policy since I'm at a policy school. We must change the metrics. Here, Karthik's work on climate change is foundational and representative of the kind of work we need. If you can't measure these actions in a way that's material and auditable and replicable, we're not going to go anywhere. Probably need to reform the takeover rules, actively support alternative governance forms, which take us a step towards a purpose, very carefully reform corporate law. If any of you are interested in these kinds of things, I have papers on them, so happy to share. And this one, change social and legal norms amongst the corporate elite. Because the obsession with shareholder value, the belief that that is what we are here for, and the only thing we're here for, is destroying the planet and our society. We have to change it. So, all we need to do is rebalance the system. Because, of course, we're not going to get this list unless we get this. So, that institutional reform project that you're all working on, really, really important. But I believe purpose-driven firms can be allies. One of the things I discuss in my book is how that has examples where we've seen that historically. Let me close, can I close, by talking about what happened to Stuart Kirk. So, giving you this great spiel, what happened to Stuart? Well, if you think my spiel has merit, here is the implication for the financial system. The big thing is to push the major players in the capital markets to grapple with the idea of universal ownership, or to understand that systemic risks cannot be easily diversified. Yes, if you are a single owner, a single investor, and you can easily diversify your portfolio, you can make a case you should care about climate. I could say, well, find the Tesla of the next generation, they're out there, and that might get some of your portfolio into climate. But what I really want you to do as an investor is push all the other firms in your portfolio to decarbonize. And you really have no incentive to do that. It's the big players, the people who are owning the whole market, the big pension firms, the big asset management firms, they can see there's a systemic risk that they can't diversify, and they have time horizons beyond 10 years. So if you're a pension fund saying in public, we do not care what happens more than 10 years from now, is a little problematic. So you might care about climate change. So what would that mean? That would mean you would try and build a purpose-driven coalition dedicated to the well-being of the entire financial system. You would try and move everyone to move all at once to push the firms in their portfolio to decarbonize. That's what you would do. So you would say things like this. You recognize this? This was my first slide. I read this and I know all these people. This is what they're trying to do. They're trying to shift the entire system by building a coalition amongst major investors. Coalitions are vulnerable to defection, right? Get everyone in line. Someone's going to say, well, why should I do this? I have to hire all these regulators and it's not making me any money. Why should I do it? And so you might say that in public at the Turning Talk into Action to Hit ESG Targets conference run by the Financial Times. And that would be a career mistake, at least in the short term. Mr. Kirk was suspended by his boss. Why? Well, perhaps his boss was vigorously punishing defection from the collective equilibrium. Can I use that kind of language? More or less, okay. That is, we were trying to get everyone to agree, okay, climate change, systemic risk, we all have to move together. And he stands up and says, well, why do I have to move? This is a nuisance. And so they say, no, you're out. That's one explanation. Another is that as soon as he gave the speech and it went onto the web, a large fraction of HSBC's major Asian clients started calling the bank. And they said, what the F? This guy runs sustainability and you're running our sustainability investment strategy? Like what? So there was self-interest involved as well. But I think suspending Mr. Kirk was probably a mistake, a serious mistake. Because if you're trying to build a collective movement to address this issue across the entire investment community, you have to take dissension seriously. You can't just sweep it under the rug. That will make people angry and fired up. Stupid thing to do. I think you need to double down on building a purpose-driven coalition based on mutual respect and full discussion. And that's why I showed you a slide saying, from Mr. Kirk's perspective, he's probably right. So, not easy, not cheap, but perhaps one tool to help us save the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was just absolutely fantastic, as always. I can see there are already lots of questions on the iPad from the online participants, and there will be questions in the room as well. And so what we will do, and again, you'll have chance for questions at the end of this when we go to breakout as well. So if we don't get to it, we'll do stick around. So let's start with Nina. Introduce yourself, Nina, and then ask the question. Meantime, I'm going to look at some of the questions online. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Professor Henderson, for both the talk and your exquisite book. I'm Nina, I'm an MPP student here. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience from the boardrooms and from your research about what actually distinguishes a company who actually becomes purpose-driven and sort of sacrifices these short-term gains for long-term from one that simply greenwashes. Like what, McKinsey also says they're purpose-driven and they still advise like insolvent and help ICE put immigrants in cages. But what is needed to enable an Eric Osmondson?
You have to really mean it. And you have to take costly actions in support of what you say you mean. For two reasons. Firstly, otherwise no one will believe you. And secondly, if you don't start acting that way, you won't really do it. So, Nina, to your point, I was recently invited by a large consulting company who will remain nameless to consider joining the advisory board of their corporate sustainability effort. And they had allocated, the partner group had allocated several $1 billion to this effort. And I said, well, that's fabulous. But the first thing you need to do is every engagement you undertake, you must explore whether it's consistent with your purpose. There was a pause and I never got a call back. So you have to mean it and you have to embed it in the strategy of the company. And you need to be willing to sometimes put money against it.
Excellent. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor, so much for the talk. I'm Alvaro. I'm also an MPP student. So my question is about how purpose-driven firms will work for small and medium enterprises. So small and medium companies make up around 90% of all businesses worldwide. They're around 60 to 70% of the labor force. And in a lot of countries, especially in developing countries, these companies, they have about 1 or 2 months of working capital. They are 1-2 bad decisions away from bankruptcy. And so the idea of thinking in the long term is in fact a privilege for a lot of these companies, a privilege that large firms have. And understand how large firms hold not only financial, but also influence over the rest of the economy. But I was wondering how you see the movement of purpose-driven firms going from large corporations into small and medium corporations across the world.
2 answers. The first is that for some small firms in some markets, purpose is profitable. If it motivates your employees, if it enables you to identify opportunities that the large firms are too stuck to see, then you can make real progress. So in many of the most exciting technological developments that are addressing climate change, it's small firms picking them up because they're much more agile, they see what needs to be done, and employees are really motivated. But I take your point. If I'm running a dry cleaning operation in Dhaka, I don't have that much slack. And so I really meant it when I said, this is not a substitute for institutional reform and good policy. Because the only way I can do the right thing in that dry cleaning unit, use better solvents that don't affect the environment, is if all my competitors do the same, and that will require regulatory action. So this agenda is sometimes taken to be like business will save the world. Business will not, business cannot. We need that broader institutional change. My suggestion is that these kinds of purpose-driven businesses can help us support the change we need on the broader stage.
Excellent. A question online. I swear I didn't plant this question from Graham Lawton, who I don't know. It says, is true cost accounting the answer or part of the answer? So I had to throw that. We can think of it as a rhetorical question. So
I thought I said, Graham, absolutely yes. It's absolutely vital. If you don't measure it, it's all bullshit. I'm sorry. If you don't measure it, it's all just corporate speak. So absolutely, we need material, auditable, replicable measures that are simple to implement and diffuse, to your point, sir, throughout the whole value chain. Yeah.
Excellent. Carlos?
Hi, Professor. My name is Carlos. I'm from Ecuador, also a student here in the MPP, and I'll actually be going to HPS next year. So my question is, we've spoken about investors, we've spoken about companies, but I was wanting to ask you about the middleman, capital markets. We've seen a culture there developing where there's high frequency trading, companies falling and rising based on quarterly results, so very short-sighted nature. How can we switch the culture of capital markets towards more long-term view without making them the companies that are adhering to this not feel like the suckers that are betting on the long term?
For sure. One of the reasons we don't have a slide about that in the deck is because the question you're asking is one of the hardest and most important questions. The best answer I know is a paper by Leo Strine, who was Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court. If you send me an email, I'll send it to you. He advocates a series of careful reforms, including making it quite clear that asset managers have a fiduciary responsibility, not just for short-term returns, but for the long-term health of their ultimate clients, and should respect the needs and wishes of that ultimate client. Because some of these asset managers are stuck in an interpretation of fiduciary duty, which says financial returns this year, which is particularly problematic. And so he has a sequence of reforms that he suggests would really help with that. The other thing that will help and is happening is the ultimate owners, the investors themselves, are standing up. One of the things that's driving change is we're in the midst of a massive transfer of wealth from in the family firms, from the older generation to the younger. And the younger generation is saying, wait, I get like 8% burn the planet, 6% don't burn the planet. Could we have that conversation, please? So just pressure from investors, and that means people like us. There's pressure on now to put in place choices as you make your pension elections. Some of you are too young to do this, but that would allow you to choose, more aligned investments, and that would help too.
Excellent. Let me look for questions. Yes, yeah.
My name is Rita. I'm doing computational finance. And so my question is it possible to some extent to incorporate the long-term information related to global warming into the short-term returns, such that income, like adding the ESG index as a way to reassess the value of a company or an asset?
Absolutely it is. And that is increasingly being done. It's hard, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen with climate change. Until quite recently, for example, many banks did not include in their decisions to whether issue a mortgage the probability of flooding in Miami. I mean, just literally wasn't in the calculations. So, you know, how much is the probability of flooding? When is it going to happen? How do I stick that into the models? This is going to take time to incorporate all these physical risks into the models. And to think, I mean, it's one thing to report, right? Karthik can report his emissions. Well, that's nice. What does that tell me about his valuation? It's going to take us time to work that out. But now I'm going to say something that I suspect Karthik says a lot, which is, you know, it took nearly 100 years to build modern financial accounting standards and to work out the relationship between the numbers on the balance sheet and the cash flow and the value of the company. That's like what accountants and finance people have been doing. So it's going to take us a while to work this out. But I think it's a major opportunity. If you're interested in these issues, lots and lots of people want to know the answer.
I suspect that earlier point about the 6 and 8% might have missed them, because I think the critical math there, if you want to just take a minute to explain why the discount rate makes a difference.
Oh, forgive me.
I'm
sorry. Thank you very much. I tend to go too fast. So the higher your discount rate, the less you value the future. And whether you use an 8% discount rate or a 6% discount rate turns out to be actually quite controversial. I mean, why use 8%? Is that really the long-term rate of return of assets on the economy? Well, some part of the long-term rate of return on assets in the economy has been obtained by strip mining the planet and our societies. So it's probably inflated. So maybe we should be using a lower discount rate. And that doesn't sound that revolutionary, right? Let's just use a lower discount rate. But it really changes the calculations you want to see about how you value different kinds of firms, right? So it's an important thing. Thank you.
Splendid. More questions online. Charlotte Hansen asks, how do you progress the idea of purpose-driven firms with decision makers? Do you do it through public campaigning? What are ways in which you actually evangelize the idea?
You try everything you can and hope something works. Sometimes people ask me what drives a firm to become purpose-driven, and it can be very varied. One CEO called me up and said, Rebecca, you know, I think all this sustainability stuff is bullshit. And I said, yeah, Steve, I know you think that. We were good friends. He said, well, everyone I'm trying to hire thinks it's important. So no, employees matter a lot. And what they care about and what they focus on matters a lot. Customers matter, not in every segment, but in some. So mostly people won't pay more for products that are more sustainably aligned, but a lot of people will switch their purchase behavior, and that's driving change. I know several firms where they changed because people in gorilla suits showed up and started climbing all over the buildings. It's really embarrassing. You know, huge banners, Unilever is destroying the rainforest. It made everyone feel like really icky. I know another firm where they changed because employees were embarrassed to go to parent-teacher meetings to talk about the firm and what the firm was doing. So social pressure, and last but not least, I know several firms where the CEOs were, this is weird to talk about in public, but here goes. Many of the purpose-driven leaders I know have spiritual commitments. They believe they are actively engaged in a community that stresses that the purpose of human life is more than simply individual gain, that it is community flourishing. And that seems to sustain them in having the courage to walk out. The most well-known of these is Paul Pullman, who was CEO of Unilever. He was thinking of training to be a priest, but he's not the only one. People don't talk about it in public for all kinds of reasons we can understand. But this sense that really it's not just about the money, money is a means to an end, that can also drive change.
And Paul now chairs the board of the business school here at Oxford.
He is.
Yes. Yeah. The gentleman in the green jumper, yeah.
My name is Hugh Lee. I've worked in the coal industry for over 50 years. I'm also a priest. I agree with all that you've said, but the problem for the oil companies is the oil companies and the state-owned oil companies in the Middle East. They are beginning to change, thank goodness, but it's still a serious problem. An even greater problem, of course, is Russia. We've just seen what Russia is doing. All that we try to do is going to be destroyed by Russia's actions if we're not careful. How do we make a purpose-driven firm in those situations?
So two things. First, this is a desperate moment. I think we should understand that. This is a very difficult moment. The good news is that we have the technology and the resources to address the problem of climate change. Humans are incredibly adaptable and resilient. If we decide to do it, we'll do it tomorrow. So we have to keep hold of that, right? And we have to keep hold of the fact that none of us can change the world, but all of us can do something. The metaphor I use is of an avalanche. You know, what causes an avalanche? A pebble causes an avalanche. Catherine Hayhoe, who's a wonderful climate scientist who has an excellent book about exactly this question, says that we're pushing this big boulder uphill. It's going to take many hands. So we all do what we can do. We change our consumption habits. We get politically engaged. If we work at a firm, we advocate for purpose in a sensible, balanced way, consistent with financial returns. We just do what we can do. If I knew a magic wand, I would be absolutely out there waving it, but I do not. I do not.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm also here in the MPP. I have a question. Let's just assume for a second that we do get true cost accounting and all of the costs of carbon is actually priced into what we consume. That would have probably a disproportionate impact on particularly lower income individuals and higher income individuals. And assuming we're all okay with that, what are some of the actual social policies you would want to see alongside of that? Because I think some things we've heard floated here in the school are universal basic income or other redistribution policies, which tend to get knee-jerk reactions depending who you're talking to. So I'd just be curious to hear what your solution would be.
So I'm not an expert on the politics of redistribution. I am a huge fan of what is called the just transition, so that as we transition, we don't harm the poorest people. There was a line on my slide that went by really quickly that said one of the policies we might want to consider is tax and dividend. So this is an example of a policy where you put a price on carbon. So when you emit greenhouse gases, you have to pay a little bit more so the price of gasoline or heating oil will go up. But you take all that money, you put it in a pot, you divide it by the number of people, and you send back the checks. And so for people like us, for whom energy consumption is a relatively small share of our income, that check is negligible, but for people at the bottom, it's a real check. And it's the data suggests it's greater than what they would lose from increases in the price. Now, all of this is speculative because the economy is a sensitive feedback, high feedback system. I spent the first 20 years of my career at MIT studying technology strategy and innovation. My belief is that if we really started to take this seriously, it would be much, much cheaper than we think. We're not on a war footing, which is extraordinary. It's really extraordinary. We're essentially fighting World War III. We have about 10 years. Your amazing colleague, Tom Hale has a lovely but rather depressing piece in the most recent Oxford Policy Review explaining why we only have 10 years. We only have 10 years because if we don't move now, the situation will be so bad, all our spare resources will be spent dealing with the effects of the unfolding disaster. Let's hope that's not right, but really the time is now. So I'm hopeful that the cost could be properly taken care of. We could transform really quickly.
Okay, Evan over there. Yep.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Evan, I'm an MPP student from Canada. And my question is exactly a follow-up to that. Like, as Tom Hill observed, we only have 10 years to really make take meaningful action. But with this sort of investor coalition and movement that you spoke of, what does that mean in terms of the pace of that coalition? Like we just saw recently BlackRock saying that it's going to kind of move away from voting on overly prescriptive climate action, and like they're one of the people that you put up, as Larry Fink, with the quote about the urgent need to take climate action. So what do you see about, and what does that imply that what we're seeing from BlackRock in terms of the pace of what's going on?
So you should corner my husband, Jim Marone, who's much more an expert in politics than I am, or any of the senior faculty here, but I will tell you what I think. When people come to me and say, what should I do? I say, if you're not committed to anything else, you should go out and make trouble and organize like crazy for the Democratic Party. Not because the Democratic Party is perfect, they are not. Not because it isn't very difficult, but you should go and work for Stacey Abrams, find out what she does, and do it in the marginal states. Because as long as the US is stuck, the geopolitics are much harder to unravel. The Republican Party is the only major political party committed to the position that climate change is not real. In their last policy platform, do you know what their last policy platform was when Donald Trump went for his second election? The policy platform was...
We support Donald Trump.
That was the policy platform. We have to have carbon policy on both sides. And so I would get really politically active. I'm hugely sympathetic to movements like the Extinction Rebellion. I do this because I'm a business school professor and I've been doing it for years, and I think I can be helpful. And everyone in this room should think about where they can have the most impact. But we need a lot of trouble, and we need it now.
Excellent. We are at time with that call to action. But huge thank you to Rebecca. Before you join me in applauding her, again, a reminder that you're all invited to stay for a drink. And Rebecca will mingle with you outside. There were a number of questions I didn't get to, so please engage. And now join me in thanking Rebecca for the talk.
I should say, and you know this, that it is an immense privilege and pleasure to be here at the Blavatnik School. I'm really enjoying my time talking. I've had the chance to talk to a few of you individually. The caliber of students and faculty is quite outstanding. And I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are MPP students, Rebecca's hosting a breakfast in a couple of weeks, a breakfast or lunch, I can't remember. It's a lunch. In a couple of weeks, so the notice of that will go around, so you'll have another chance to engage with her.